Hey folks, so this is a bit of an instructional video to give you some idea of how to approach your poster project in terms of bringing together images, text, dealing with size issues, and so on and so forth. And so I'm just going to walk you through a few key things that I tend to want to do when I'm making a poster. This doesn't mean that this is the only way to do it, but this might be useful for working through some of these questions and some of these problems. And just to let you know as the background for here, I'm using my computer's own microphone, so I'm not plugging in a more sophisticated microphone or anything like this when I'm making this video. And I'm using QuickTime, which it comes free on Macs and is a really easy way to do your presentations, which we're going to talk about in due course. It's not the most sophisticated screencasting software in the world, but it'll get the job done, and it's free because you already have it. As I noted in the unit notes, there are several online tools as well that people use that seem to work quite well. So to begin with, in this poster, I've got, we can go down here to page setup. So I've got this at 33 by 46 inches, which is basically A1 size format. Everywhere else except in the US uses this paper size system, A1, A2, A3, A4, all the way over to A10, basically as a way of designating paper sizes. So 33 by 46 inches is roughly A1. You can equally do 46 by 33 inches if you prefer a wider poster rather than a taller poster. It's entirely up to you. So here, and the one thing you do have to make sure is that you don't have a cold like me when you're trying to record, so you're not coughing too much. But a few general points here. Now, obviously, at this distance, you see a lot of my desktop and the clutter, and the text is quite hard to read for being quite small. So the first thing we can do is just go into presentation mode over here in Google Slides, which lets us obviously see things a little bit more clearly. It's a little bit less distracting and so forth. Likewise, then now here we can sort of vary it. We can change this and we can rework it a little bit. But if we don't go into that, rather, and we can kind of expand the screen to occupy the whole thing over here, press Escape, and then View and Show Full Screen to get rid of some of the clutter and get rid of some of the distraction and the noise. Now what this means is that we can see the text a little bit more clearly. Now, if you feel like you still want to see the text more clearly than that, it would be a good idea when you're presenting, so there's a trick to that as well. If we go back and we get back our toolbar, we can just go ahead and zoom in. And you see now, as you're presenting, you can zoom in, so that in this case I am talking about territoriality and maritime boundaries. And I'm not just reading the text that's on the poster, I'm fleshing out this issue, I'm adding in some information that'll be useful for my listeners to understand and to kind of grasp. Likewise, as I'm looking through this, I'm noticing small spelling mistakes, Vietnam, for example, but the whole point is that this being a draft and not a complete poster, I have the option to basically work my way through here. Now, in terms of the elements of it, I'm going to get rid of the zoom so that we can kind of roll our way up here. For the title, I've tried to be a little bit fun and a little bit cheeky with the whole thing. So this is a quotation from the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, or rather a paraphrasing of it with my own little ending to it. The whole point is that a poster is supposed to get people's attention, and I'll go into full screen here. It's supposed to get people's attention. So thinking about a way to really get to the point with your title in a way that's catchy can be a really good thing. At the same time, though, it's not all nonsense, because nor any spot to fish is actually central to the argument I'm making over here. The whole issue at this poster is the territorial battle over the South China Sea and disputes over fishing rights. So it makes perfect sense, as I'm explaining this topic to the folks listening, that lo and behold, I have this title that kind of ties into the whole thing. Now, in terms of layout, and to kind of zoom back here, we can go into View and zoom out really quickly. I've chosen a really pretty simple layout that kind of brings us down vertically through sections. So I would have an overview of the issue. I would have a paragraph on UNCLOS, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. That's not really the issue here, but the point being that this would be substantive to what I'm trying to say. And then I have a series of images that I would refer to in the text, if possible, that would tie in really clearly. So the first one is an image of the cod wars, Britain's war over cod fish with Iceland in the 1970s. Yes, this happened, and don't ask right now, it's just too long of a story. The point being that all of these images tie in very tightly to the story that I'm trying to tell more broadly about fishing rights, maritime boundaries, and so forth. Figure 3, unclosed boundary lines. You'll notice that I've labeled my images, figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, and I've provided abbreviated information on the sources just down here. Needless to say, you should do the same thing, because this is going to be really important. Then, if we scroll down over here, I've put together a timeline of the conflict and of the issues that I'm describing, and each paragraph goes in hand with a different map or a different satellite image. Now, I haven't completed this, but the point is just to illustrate a little bit of how this works. There are lots of different ways to do a timeline if it's compatible with the poster on the project that you're doing. And I'm going to show you in a few minutes a really different example of students who did the same kind of thing, but really quite differently, and it works really well too. The point I'm simply trying to make here is that a timeline is actually a really good visual component that you can build into your poster. It shows your knowledge and it shows the choices that you're making. At the same time, it lets us follow along a visual sequence. Obviously, all poster topics won't go in hand with an image for each time period the way I have in this case, but the point is to be creative and work with what you have. And then I have another separator here, so the timeline of the conflict breaks up the poster vertically once, the line itself, and then I have another separator to the Permanent Court of Arbitration case between China and the Philippines. This was a judgment that was rendered in 2016. So here I have a paragraph on long-term implications, and obviously I can get a little bit into questions around globalization and so forth, likewise in the conclusion. At the very bottom, you see it's wee little tiny over here, but basically we have a list of works cited. And here is where you're going to put your citations and your references in, I would suggest, APA format, so basically the brackets in the text, such as you have just over here with Lechner's reference. And then, at the very bottom, and once again we'll zoom in as I'm talking about this, we'll zoom in, we have the list of works cited, the cod wars, and so on and so forth. I know that some of the guides you'll find online will tell you not to bother with a set of references at the bottom of your poster. I'm going to ask you to do them, however, for a really simple reason. Some of the guides are designed around people presenting their posters at academic conferences, where the whole point is that you're there to talk about what you did and what your research was and what sources you access. Here you are doing a presentation around your poster and you're not going to have time for that. So I'd prefer that you find a little bit of a space just somewhere nearish the bottom to put a list of works cited. It can be set up like this as a long line, so the first one, then the second one, and so on and so forth. Alternately, it can just be a little vertical box just past the conclusion somewhere over here. What's right is what works for you, both in terms of your aesthetic sensibilities and also in terms of making your poster work as a whole. If we zoom out a little bit here, there we go. I've obviously chosen a really vertical layout, sort of section 1, section 2, section 3 in this one. However, this is by no means the only way to do it. And spending some time at Better Posters, the website that I linked to in Blackboard, will certainly give you lots of different ideas of how you can go about this. Now the obvious question is that, well, a couple of obvious questions. One is that when you're doing your presentation, you may find that it's hard to zoom in and zoom out and so forth. To give you an idea of the font sizes I've been using over here, so I've used Montserrat as my font. Unlike in an essay, here you are encouraged to experiment with fonts and be a little bit experimental in terms of the look of your poster. 20-point font for the body text, usually somewhere between 18 and 22 is good for body texts. Somewhat larger for the subheadings, 36. And then 60 for the poster title. Now these are, again, not hard and fast rule. People do different things, but the point is that there is, roughly this is what you want to be keeping in mind. This said, when you're presenting electronically, this makes it a little bit of a challenge for folks to see. One way of dealing with that is, like I said, just to sort of zoom in on the different sections as you're talking about them, as I'm doing over here. Okay, that's a little bit too big, but yeah, I think you all get the idea pretty clearly. Other way is to make the text suitably bigger and move into a 2-poster slide presentation format. I had my students do this actually last semester when I taught this course in person because they were projecting their posters onto the screen, and lo and behold, it was actually pretty hard to see when we were dealing with 18-point font on the screen. So this is a poster on the Kimberley project, or the Kimberley process, which is a diamond certification process to prevent so-called diamond wars and diamond resource struggles. A couple of things that are really notable about this one. First of all, the timeline looks really different from my timeline, but it works really well. The dates are there, it's pretty clear, we understand in which order we're supposed to be reading, we're not guessing our way around everything. It works very nicely. And then second, these students basically use significantly larger fonts, in this case 23 points, but also I think Arial font, which comes up a little bit bigger in the layout of the poster. And they spread the whole thing over 2 separate slides. So the choice here is yours. If you want to do a single poster and, like I said, zoom in, zoom out as you read your presentation, you're more than welcome to do that. If you want to do a 2-poster structure or a 2-poster layout, again, you're more than welcome to do that as well. So these are just some of the issues and some of the dynamics of poster design. And I want to be really clear here, I'm not trying to present myself as an expert on this topic, but I have done it a fairly reasonable number of times, and I have gotten a little bit of a sense, I'd like to think, regarding what works and maybe what doesn't work so well. So these are ideas, and these are sort of a few hints as to how you can set up your own process and how you can sort of start to think about both what your poster is going to be saying and also how it's going to look, and how you're going to make it visible to us as you're presenting it and screencasting your presentation. I'm going to do a separate presentation on screencasting itself. It's a pretty simple process to learn, but I'll provide you resources with that as well. Hopefully this is helpful, and I look forward to seeing your drafts of your poster projects. Thank you very much.